Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. What I'd like to do today is do a direct comparison of 3 commercial space blankets. The first one we're going to talk about is the Grabber. This is the traditional space blanket that's reusable that most people carry with them, especially if they come to Pathfinder type classes, because this is the blanket that I've been using for years for both teaching as well as personal use. A newer blanket on the market, which is called the Arc'teryx blanket, which my buddy Corporal Corner did a review on off of Amazon. Again, this is a really good blanket as well. Retails for about $20 on Amazon. And then the new Pathfinder reusable emergency space blanket. This blanket is very similar in construction to the Arc'teryx. It's a little darker green, more of an OD green, and it has another feature on it I want to go over with you and show you that makes it one step better, I think, than the Arc'teryx, and it's also less money. Stay with me and we'll get started. All right, so let's get started today by just comparing the blankets in and of themselves, all right? The traditional Grabber blanket, again, is the one that we used for years here at the Pathfinder School. It is an emergency tool. It's not something that's meant to be used over and over, time and time again. It's meant to be used in one emergency as an insurance policy, and then you get rid of it if you tear it up and you buy a new one. They're about 20, 25 bucks retail. Pretty cheap life insurance policy. The problem that we've run into with this blanket teaching survival classes is that when you reuse this blanket over and over again, it tends to get damaged fairly easily. And the biggest problem that folks have is where these grommet holes are at. You have a very small grommet hole here with very little reinforcement, and it doesn't take a whole lot to tear that grommet out. You can see I just pulled on it with one hand and ripped that grommet completely out. So it doesn't take a whole lot of wind, it doesn't take a whole lot of force to tear these grommets out. But again, in the defense of this blanket that we've used for years, it was made as an emergency piece of gear to be used one time for a 2-3 day scenario and done. So it's not something you'd use every day. Now, the Arc'teryx blanket comes in its own pouch. So you've got a place you can store some emergency shelter items like steaks that were pre-made. Who wants to carve steaks in an emergency? You're going to carry some steaks. You would carry maybe your ridge line and carry a couple of guy lines in there to tie this thing up in different shelter configurations. So having the bag is a good thing. It came with a reinforced grommet on it that was much better than the Grabber. You can see that it's actually got material here that larger grommet is sewn into. It has the same hex pattern as the Grabber blanket does, but it has much more reinforcement around. All 4 sides are made of material, whereas the Grabber is made from a really thin nylon type material. So you have a lot more reinforcement on this blanket as far as its longevity goes, because you have actual fabric that is holding this grommet in place, and you have fabric around the outside that's stitched along the outside of the blanket, whereas the Grabber had a thin piece of nylon here and a very thin piece of nylon reinforcing the grommet on one side and nothing on the opposite side. This one's reinforced on both sides, okay, of the blanket. So that's a very good blanket, and if I remember right, my buddy Corporal Corner hung some pretty good weight off of this blanket when he did the testing of it to make sure that the grommets held the way they're supposed to. Now let's get to the Pathfinder blanket. This is a new release item. We just received stock on this. We had a prototype in hand a couple months back or so. Actually, before Corporal Corner did this video on the Arc'teryx blanket, we had prototypes of this blanket, but we weren't ready to release it yet because we wanted to make sure that it was exactly what we wanted. It comes in its own zippered pouch, just like the Arc'teryx. The blanket itself is very similar. The difference is, when you look at this blanket, and I'm going to show you both of these up close on the video, you can see that this is a darker color of green. It's a darker olive green than the Arc'teryx. You can also see the hex pattern through the coating on the back of this blanket on the opposite side of the Mylar. On the Pathfinder blanket, you can't see that. What that means is the coating on this blanket that's made it green over the Mylar is a heavier coating, which means it should be a more robust blanket. The grommets are exactly the same on both of these blankets. They're exactly the same size, exactly the same configuration. These blankets could be made in the same factory. The grommet is just a little bit different grommet on this one to that one, but virtually it's just a different color. They're put in exactly the same way. They're exactly the same size. The difference is on this blanket is the coating and the color. The coating is thicker on this blanket than it is on this blanket. So let's take this Pathfinder blanket, put it through some stress tests, set it up in a couple shelter configurations, and check it out up close and personal. All right, so what I want to do here is I want to put some side-to-side stress on this blanket. So instead of using a ridge line with 2 toggles on it, where I'm just stretching that ridge tight with 2 prusik knots, I actually have it pre-connected by a toggle there, and I'm actually going to run a rope through this toggle and put a trucker's hitch in this side of the rope and use this as a ratchet to tighten it with, just like this, just to give it a little bit of side-to-side stress, because I actually want to see if I can actually pull down tight on this thing and see what the grommets do. That's tighter by a long shot than I would ever make that tarp with a prusik. I've actually got the paracord stretching right here. All right, so here you can see we've yanked that thing to the point where the paracord is flattened out with this trucker's hitch, and that grommet still did not tear out, and there's not that much stress on the tarp itself. Now, like I said, I would never stretch this tarp this hard in a normal situation, because I would not have it stretched between 2 points on a single ridge line like that. I would always use my prusiks, but since we've got her stretched out really good, let's just grab a couple of toggles off the ground here. And might as well stretch this thing out too. Get that thing good and flat. Another toggle. Go over to the other side. Do the same thing. All right, guys, so here's your typical half-face shelter or lean-to you would use as a basis for your emergency shelter. With the new Pathfinder emergency space blanket, comes in orange as well as green. The retail price, I'm sure someone's going to ask of this, $17.95. $17.95. Comes with its own pouch. Comes with a heavy-duty backing, both in OD green as well as orange. Should be available on our website when this video is loaded. Okay, guys, so again, this is an emergency blanket. It is a more robust product in my mind than both the Arc'teryx or the Grabber, but you can break an anvil if you try hard enough. So if you put enough pressure on this thing, you can tear it out. There's no question about it. But I think for the money and for what you get with the product, the pouch, the heavy coating, those type things, you're getting a better product for your money here for an emergency use type item. And I think this is going to last longer in our classes with multiple uses and multiple stresses put on the grommets, things like that, than say the Grabber would have. And because it has a thicker coating on it than the Arc'teryx, it should be a little bit longer lasting without that starting to rub off or chip out, which happens with all of those blankets over time, to include the Grabber.